Recording in progress.
invitation to this event and joining us here. Many of you have also joined us live. This event is is in a hybrid mode, and we are going live on YouTube as well. More than 600 people registered on Zoom, and most of them are joining in here. All the people, especially the online audience, are welcome to place their questions and messages before the speakers through the Q&A box on your screens. On YouTube, you can engage with us through the comment box. Professor Alak Sharma, co-founder and director of the Institute for Human Development, is a development economist who has made significant contributions to research in varied areas such as livelihoods, labor migration, poverty, employment, labor markets, political economy, and related issues. Professor Sharma is also the editor of Indian Journal of Labor Economics, the Quarterly Journal of Indian Society of Labor Economics, and the Indian Journal of Human Development, which is brought out by IHD and SAGE. I invite him for his welcome and opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute for Human Development, IHD, I extend my warm welcome to all of you who have found time this evening to be here. We are grateful to Dr. Indermit Gill, Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of World Bank, for agreeing to deliver this lecture under the IHD Silver Jubilee lecture series. Dr. Gill is an eminent development economist with global reputation. His short CV is circulated. It is in your folder. You can see his outstanding contributions in various fields. By the way, he's a Desi and did his master's from Delhi School of Economics. And my colleague, Tanuka Endo, where is he? Oh, who is professor at ISD, was his classmate in Delhi School of Economics. As Chief Economist of World Bank and Senior Vice President, I know Dr. Gill is extremely busy. Even then, he accommodated our request. Thanks a lot, Dr. Gill, for your consideration and favor. I thank Professor Lakhvinder Singh, visiting professor at IHD and former professor of Punjab University, for persuading him to deliver this lecture. And of course, I should thank IHD Chairman Professor Deepak Nayyar and my colleague Tanuka to make it pakka. I am very grateful to Dr. Anant Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor of India, for having agreed to chair this lecture. Dr. Nageshwaran, of course, is an eminent economist with diverse experiences and contributions. He is a very busy person in India. All of his multiple roles, activities in the government of India and with other states, we see in the newspapers, media. I think the work of economic survey must have started by now, which would have made him even busier. Even then, he could find time. Thanks a lot, Dr. Nageshwaran. Hope that he will be with ISD events in future as well. I am also very thankful to Dr. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Dr. Kome, Auguste Kome, who, okay, fine, who joined World Bank as World Bank country director about a year back, and he could find time. This is our first interaction with him, ISD, and he has also agreed to address this audience, but also agreeing to co-host this event and the reception that I hope that all of you will be joining. It is hosted by World Bank. And thanks, Dr. Country Director, for this thing. I thank Dr. Soumya Kapoor Mehta for facilitating it. We have done, Dr. Kome, we have done a number of things with World Bank. Maybe a dozen of studies so far, not less than that. And also have organized half a dozen conferences, workshops, and consultations. I have not seen the record, but it is minimum that I'm saying. But a rather big international conference with World Bank on the topic prosperity, equality, and sustainability, perspectives and policies for a better world, was organized by IHD with support from multi-donor trust fund of World Bank during 1st to 3rd June 2016, with more than 300 people, including close to 100 from outside India. It was a very successful conference. I hope we have not got such a generous funding from World Bank since then. Now that country director and senior vice president and chief economist is sitting, we hope that in future it will happen. Though an internal person, I should also thank Professor Deepak Nair, IHD chairman, an economist with global reputation. Professor Nair was chief economic advisor to the government of India more than 3 decades back. Dr. Nageswaran, your predecessor, more than 3 decades back. He's chairman of IHD, but apart from that, he chairs many institutions, such as Center for Studies in Developing Society, Institute of Development Studies, Sussex. Very recently, he was pressurized, including by me, to become chairman of a Patna-based institution, Asian Institute of Development Research. And at the same time, he's busy in his academic pursuits and meetings, but always willing to provide us support. So thanks, Professor Nair, for all your support. Friends, on this occasion, I should tell you briefly about IHD and Silver Jubilee. As we are celebrating now, not celebrating, we completed 25 years 1 year back until March 2024, our Silver Jubilee celebration will continue. IHD, something unique in the sense that it was established by Indian Society of Labor Economics. Priyanka said I was a co-founder. Other co-founder, Professor Ishar Hasim, is sitting, who was member planning commission at that time. So it is celebrating now Silver Jubilee of founding. IHD, Dr. Nageswaran, for your attention, it is solely based on projects. But it has been working rather extensively on livelihood, labor, and employment, and other human development issues. We have completed large number of projects, maybe 400 odds, published 60 books, monographs, organized many conferences, maybe more than 200. It works also with various government, central as well as state, and is in an Indian Council of Social Science Research recognized institute. We had published several development reports, maybe 8-10 state human development reports in collaboration with the state government. It houses Indian Society of Labor Economics, Indian Association of Social Science Institutions. It publishes two peer-reviewed journals. Indian Journal of Labor Economics, currently in its 65th year of publication, and published by Springer. And we also published Indian Journal of Labor Economics, published by SAYS, now 16 years old. We have established a good network of researchers working particularly in labor and human development issues in Global South. We have also done a number of research, comparative studies with South Africa, Brazil, South Asia, and other Asian countries. Friends, as I mentioned earlier, that during its year-long Silver Jubilee celebration, IHD organizing several events. And one of them is Silver Jubilee lectures. In this series, we had lectures delivered by Dr. Hajun Chung, as told Priyanka, on generation field, Dr. Albert Park, Chief Economist of Asian Development Bank, on August 3, well-known climate activist Ms. Sunita Narayan on August 11, and this is the fourth lecture. After this lecture, we will have a lecture by Ashwani Seth, Emeritus Professor at ISS Hague and former Professor London School of Economics, in late November. On 3rd January 2024, we will have lecture by Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee. 10th January by World Bank former senior advisor and now director, International Inequality Institute, London School of Economics, Francisco Ferreira, on 10th January. And 5th February by Kaushik Basu. Late February by Professor Deepak Nayyar. First week of March by Jean Drez in Ranchi. We have a regional office, Eastern Regional Office in Ranchi. Sorry for giving all these details, but I thought that I should try to give some good impression to World Bank and Dr. Nageshwaran, because we are project-based institutions. And last 28th March, by well-known management expert, Ms. Rama Bijapurkar at Hyderabad. We are trying to have a couple of more lectures, and I have given the responsibility of this to requested Professor Deepak Nayyar to find suitable persons. So you can see it is mixed. Climate activists, management experts, people from diverse fields, we are doing it. As a part of Silver Jubilee celebration, IHD has organized so far 2 major international conferences. The first one was on new technologies and future of work in Global South. It was organized during 17-19 July by IHD in collaboration with Niti Aayog, ILO, and Wits University, which is more than 100 years old university in South Africa, with them, with 250 participants, including 35 from outside India. The second, I won't give more details, the second conference on inclusive and sustainable urban development in Global South was, and this will be of particular interest to Dr. Somik Lal. It was also organized jointly by ISD with University of Florida, Niti Aayog, and here 300 people, 50 from outside India. But the last and concluding Silver Jubilee Conference, which we are calling Global Conclave on Advancing Human Development in Global South, is being organized during 11 to 13th January 2024. We are planning in a big way. We expect a large participation, over 350 people. We have received, in response to our call for papers, something like 650 abstracts. Of course, all of them won't be selected, maybe 20% of them. Apart from around, so we expect more than 350 people, including more than 100 from outside India. Apart from around, I'm sorry I am sharing this conference because we require, and Soumya Kapoor Mohta knows about that, a large funding for this. And now, Research and Information System, RIS, think tank of Ministry of External Affairs, they are celebrating 40 years of their founding. And they are our partner. And today we got a letter from Niti Aayog that they will be, they are also willing to partner with this conference. So apart from around 150, 160 invited and selected papers from call for papers, we'll have 6-7 plenary sessions as well as round tables. It will be great if Dr. Gill is able to find a day or two from his busy schedules for this conference. I'm not sure. Now he's visiting in January, but it is worth requesting him to do it. If he's not able to come, he can send suitable person. I was just talking to Dr. Somik Lal and trying to persuade him that this conference theme is also suitable for him. Oh, very good. So thank you. But I would request you, Dr. Indermit Gill and Dr. Kome, to also provide us some financial support. So, thank you. So, friends, sorry, I took a lot of time, but no, we work, I don't know, just about institute. It is a public institution without giving any penny of regular funding. Publishing 2 journals, housing Indian Society of Labor Economics, one institution, Indian Association of Social Science Institution, whose director is sitting here. It was thrown by IIP and not by him, by someone else. And we had to give shelter, and we are running it now. So we give all these things which doesn't give money, who gives training to researchers, serves institutions. But Dr. Nageswaran, I think worth considering, you can give next budget some grant to IHD. It is in your hands. Our friend Kaushik Basu was there. He told me, I did not become active. He was also our board member. He's also coming to the ISD Global Conference in January. We could not utilize it. So hope that Dr. Nageswaran will be able to do it. Friends, now I won't take much of your time and obstruct the lecture by Dr. Gill on a topic very important in the contemporary discourse, both academic and policy. This topic of creative destruction and middle income trap is very relevant for countries like India also. India is the fastest growing economy of the world, but is still in the lower middle income group with low HDI. I hope that with this lecture and intervention by Dr. Nageswaran, we will have relevant lessons for India as well. Of course, global lessons. With these words, I thank you all and welcome all of you to this ISD Silver Jubilee lecture by Dr. Gill, and thank all of you for exploring your time to be with this discipline. But please also join the reception hosted by World Bank, because, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. Professor Deepak Nair, Emeritus Professor Jawaharlal Nehru University and former Vice Chancellor of University of Delhi, has held several important positions both in academia and policy and has contributed immensely in both the spheres. His research interests are primarily in the areas of international economics, macroeconomics, development economics, and economic history. He has published numerous articles and books. With great respect, I invite the Chairman of Institute for Human Development to address the gathering.
Our distinguished speaker, Indermit Gill, Our chair, Anant Nageshwaran, our guest, Augustin Kwame, resident representative of the World Bank in India, and my colleagues on the podium. I think we have said enough in terms of advertisements for ourselves, and I cannot compete with Alak. So maybe I'll do something different. We have gathered here this evening to celebrate the Silver Jubilee of IHD. Birthdays are a time for celebration. But there are two differences between individuals and institutions in this domain. At 25, individuals are adults who begin their working life. Institutions are young, almost infant-like. In that sense, we've been child labor for 25 years. The other difference is that individuals celebrate birthdays on one day. Institutions, as you've heard, celebrate birthdays over a year, and we are doing so. We're small in size. We're the staff or budget. We are 20-odd people. Our budget is about 6 crores, $750,000. But that is very deceptive. I recall Stephen Heimer. He wrote an essay on the evolution of the multinational corporation. When he compared the East India Company and the Royal Dutch East Indies Company with present-day large international firms, and he says the difference is simple. The East India Company was much like a dinosaur, large in bulk, small in brain, but the modern multinational corporation is the opposite. It's small in size, but large in brain. Now, in a sense, that is also IHD. We are small in size, but we are large in brain. And I always think of the Schumacher epithet, small is beautiful. It describes us well. Yet, for our small size, we pack a big punch, even if I say so. Now, above all, I think of IHD as a meeting space, both virtual and real, for it has convening power. It brings together economists, social scientists, policy practitioners, civil society, trade unions, many others, to that common meeting space, just as it brings people from across the breadth of India and from across the world. And in that sense, its domain stretches much beyond human development. Now, I actually think that the theme of Indermit's lecture is engaging, exciting. And I just want to set the stage with two observations. In his book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, Joseph Schumpeter perceived creative destruction as the essential fact about capitalism and referred to the incessant mutation of the economic structure from within, destroying the old and creating the new. Much like Marx, Schumpeter believed that capitalism is an evolutionary process which never is and never can be stationary. The fundamental impulse that sets and keeps the capitalist regime or engine in motion comes from new goods, new methods of production, new methods of transportation, we would call it logistics now, created by the Schumpeterian entrepreneur, who is always on the lookout for new combinations of labor and capital, new products, new innovations. Now, the process of creative destruction, Schumpeter recognizes, takes time. And therefore, it is no point in appraising performance within a framework of comparative statistics. So the real problem then is not about firms making decisions to maximize profits within a given structure. And please compare this with Alfred Marshall, his notion of the entrepreneur who saw everything, controlled everything, did everything. But it was a structure that was given, and the firm made decisions to maximize profits. But now capitalism destroys and creates these structures. On balance, presumably, Schumpeter is no longer with us, the process of creative destruction is more creative than destructive, both in terms of output and employment. Let me turn briefly to the middle income trap, of which Indermit is one of the original architects. It describes a situation where a country makes a transition from low income to middle income status, but gets stuck there, unable to move from middle income to high income status. The first stage in the transition is driven by abundant cheap labor and high investment rates. And industrialization stops as labor-intensive goods as wages rise. Now, the second stage in the transition requires higher productivity levels and a capacity to innovate. This, in turn, requires nurturing managerial and technological capabilities, fostering vertical diversification in production processes, encouraging technological upgrading, fostering technological learning, and creating R&D capacities. Now, in my view, the attainment of these long-term strategic objectives depends not just on industrial policy and human resources, and that's the connect with human development, but also on the quality of industrial policy. Now, thus far, as Indermit, I'm sure will say, that only a few countries, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, to which I would add Israel in the past 50 years, that have, in a sense, caught up. China is on the way, but it is by no means a foregone conclusion. Whereas Latin American countries are the classic example of the middle income trap. Now, India, Turkey, Vietnam have possibilities, but they have miles to go. Now, let me just end with one proposition, really to set the stage for Indermit's exciting lecture. You know, creative destruction is an analytical construct derived from theorizing about the evolution of capitalism by Schumpeter. It is, in effect, not only about the micro level, the firm and the entrepreneur, but also about the macro level, how and why economic structures change. Now, the middle income trap is a concept or idea based on stylized facts. It was developed at the World Bank, and I think Indermit was a major architect in this conception, drawing upon development experience of countries during the second half of the 20th century. Now, I look forward to how Indermit is going to connect the idea of creative destruction with the idea of the middle income trap. Chair, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As you are aware, this event is being co-hosted with the World Bank, for which we are very thankful to the bank. We are delighted to have amongst us Dr. Auguste Kouame, who took over as the World Bank's country director for India in August 2022. A national of Cote d'Ivoire, he most recently served as the World Bank's country director for the Republic of Turkey. Prior to this, he has served on several important positions in the World Bank in various Latin American and Caribbean countries. He was a core team member of the World Bank's 1998-99 World Development Report on Knowledge and Development. It is a privilege to invite Dr. Kouame to address the gathering.
Thank you. I think I stand in the most uncomfortable space between you and the lecture by Indermit. So I'll be super brief. Thank you, Professor Nayar, for inviting us, associating us to this event. Thank you, Professor Sharma, also for doing the same. It's really a pleasure to be in IHD today, and I hope it will not be the last time for me personally, and certainly not the last time for the World Bank to be associated with you. Whether we bring big money or not, we would love to be a knowledge partner of yours. It is a distinct pleasure and honor to be associated with this first lecture by our own Dr. Indermit Gill, who, as you all know, is the World Bank Chief Economist and Senior Vice President for Development Economics. He's a distinguished economist globally. He is a role model for many of us at the World Bank. When I grow up, I would like to be like him, where I do not only development work, which is boring, but also research, which will make me feel smarter. And I'm still hoping to follow in his footsteps. Indermit, thank you very much for having mentored many of us at the World Bank. I know you're very passionate about seeing others succeed, and you've done just that in many of my colleagues that I know at the World Bank. I'm also very delighted to share the panel with Dr. Ananta Nageswaran, who, as you all know, is the chief economic advisor of the government of India. We work very closely with him here in India, and I've benefited from his insight on many occasions and in many discussions. I look forward to doing the same, and happy to share the panel also with Priyanka and Tanuka, if I got the name right. Thank you. So today I will be brief, but one thing that struck me looking at the WDR that Indermit is overseeing is the fact that the median income for the median middle income country today has just 1/5 of the US income per capita. This is low, but what is even striking is that it has remained at that level since the 70s. So it is fair for some to ask whether there is a trap, whether when you reach that middle income group, you get stuck there. Maybe it's a glass ceiling, but a few countries have gotten out of it. So it's also fair to ask, what does it take to break out of this middle income trap? And I'm looking forward to learning from the WDR on the preparation on what it takes, whether there is a recipe or not to achieve that. We know that even if there is a recipe, it's going to be very, very tough for countries to do so, because it's a game of running fast in order to stay in the same position. Because as you try to break out of the middle income trap, other countries are also trying to grow, and including those who are ahead of you. And in the world we live today, we would like all countries to succeed. So we support every country in whatever they're doing. So we make it even more difficult for countries in middle income to catch up with the others, because we're encouraging others also to do well. And that's the business in which we are. So for middle income countries, it's really an uphill battle to do better on average than others, and hope there will be some recipes that we'll learn from Indermit's presentation. To me, the question I ask myself is whether being a middle income group is a destiny, is a final destination. Maybe it is, because after all, when you're in that group, you're doing better than those who are not in the group, those who are actually no income. So maybe it's a good place to be. Maybe it's a comfort zone. Maybe when the countries get there, they actually like staying there because you are under the shadow of countries that are doing well, and you can copy the ideas, without being punished too much. You can break rules without being scorned off. So maybe it's a comfort zone where countries are actually okay to be there. Why be too visible? And so maybe it's also a takeoff zone. Maybe it's a place where when you learn so much and so quickly because you have the basics, and you can learn really fast and take off. Maybe a few countries have done that, as we heard earlier. Maybe South Korea has done so, maybe Taiwan, maybe Singapore. That's what they did. They saw that place as a training ground to flex their muscles and then take off very quickly. Hopefully that's what it is, but I don't have the answer. I just know from some of the readings I've seen that for countries to do well, they need to focus on three things, and I will call them differently from what you would hear in Indermit's presentation. I'll call them the 3 Ps. One is to focus on people. The other one is to focus on prosperity. And the third one is to focus on the planet. It sounds very ambitious for countries to be asked to focus on the planet if they want to do well, because, who is going to finance what they wouldn't do by focusing on the planet? It's not their responsibility. But in fact, if you want to do well as a middle-income country and break out of that trap, surprisingly, you have to focus on not just your people or your prosperity, but also the planet where we all live. So let me stop here and leave you in Indermit's hands so we can all learn from the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kawame. We are very thankful to the Chief Economic Advisor of Government of India, Dr. Nageswaran, to have agreed to chair this lecture, a multifaceted personality. Dr. Nageswaran has worked as a writer, author, teacher, and consultant. He has taught at several business schools and institutes of management in India and in Singapore, and has published extensively. He holds and has held several important positions in various national and international institutions and organizations. He has also been a part-time member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of of India from 2019 to 21. He earned his doctoral degree from University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I now invite Dr. Nageshwaran to kindly chair and moderate this session.
How does this work?
Yes.
It's working. Yeah, it's working. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know that all of us are nervous about standing between you and the speaker, and I'm the last one, so I will have to really keep it brief. I wouldn't mention each and every one of my colleagues on the stage because you can see the name tags in front of them. But all I can say is I'm a bit nervous about not bringing down the average intellectual quotient on the stage by being here. We are supposed to hear about the middle income trap of nations, but before that we heard the young income trap of IHD and how to avoid it by Professor Alak Sharma. So now, therefore, without much further ado, I'm going to invite my good friend Indermit to commence his lecture. I have the pleasure of introducing him, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to read out every single line on his on the CV. All I would say is that, as Auguste put it, he's not only the chief economist, but the senior vice president for development economics. He has taught at various institutions, and he has a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. So this is a topic that is going to be of much relevance to many countries, and the fact that only few of them managed to avoid it makes it all the more interesting for us to know if there is a miracle, as Indermit mentions in his preface, if there is a miracle to be able to avoid the middle income trap. So we're all waiting to hear about that recipe from Indermit. Over to you. Thank you.
And I can see the slides here. Brilliant. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, got it, got it. Thank you very much. So I should actually not give a talk at all because everybody has done a really good job of both introducing me and the subject. So I think that actually, the short explanation that Professor Nair gave is a really good one, right? So I don't know if I'll be able to improve on it, but I came all the way to speak, so I'm going to speak, right? So I want to thank you all very, very much, all of you, Professors Alak Sharma, Professor Deepak Nair, Priyanka Tyagi, and also to my friends, especially to my friends, Professors Tanuka Endau, who I always remember as Professor Tanuka Bhaumik, and my friend, Professor Lakhvinder Singh, both of whom who actually persuaded me to be here. I'm really glad that they did. And I want to thank Anant and Auguste for being here too. So Anant and Auguste, I hope you guys learned something because I know that you don't learn much in your day jobs. So my name is Indermit Gill, and I'm here. So I'm here with my colleague Shomik Lal. We are both economists at the World Bank. And yeah, so so I'm going to show you some slides along the way, but the plan today is to discuss what's become known as the middle income trap and what countries like India can do to avoid it, right? So it's based on the work that we are doing for the next World Development Report. So it's not finished yet. It's about 3/4 of the way through. So I'll talk for about 20 minutes about the main ideas and the findings. I'll just give you a sense of it, right? I won't actually give you a good summary of it. But Shomik Lal, who is the director of the World Development Report, and I can then answer your questions, right? So I'll give you a short history about why we were doing this report. So about 2 years ago, when I joined the World Bank, so I found that high-income countries were actually very happy with the World Bank because the World Bank was working hardest on what they saw as the biggest problem in the world, which was climate change, right? And low-income countries were really happy because the bank was working hard to provide, because the bank was working hard to provide cheaper development finance, right? Now, the thing that I learned was that that middle-income countries were not happy with the World Bank, right? They felt that that they were being asked to adjust their development strategies to take into account the global environmental effects of their growth, and they were not getting much help in accessing long-term development finance, even at market interest rates, right? And in 2022, last year, things got worse for them, not better. So about 10 months ago, I guess in January of this year, right, Somik? He put together a team to start work on the problems that are being faced by today's middle-income countries. And we were joined in this venture by Professor Ufuk Azit of the University of Chicago. And like I said, I'm just going to give you a small taste of what they've been cooking. And if you remember, please, if you don't like the taste, it might be that the dish is still uncooked. But if you break out in hives because of allergies, then you must tell us, and we'll make sure that we'll try in the weeks ahead to prepare a more tolerable dish. Huh? Okay, so what are the countries that we are talking about, right? So the way that middle-income countries are defined by the World Bank, these are those with per capita incomes between around $1,200 to around $12,000 per capita. And there are about 100 countries that we call middle-income economies. And these are divided into two groups. Lower middle-income economies like India and Indonesia and Vietnam, they have incomes between around $1,200 and $4,800, around $5,000. And upper middle-income economies like China and Brazil and Mexico have incomes between $5,000 and $12,000, right? Now, these are the most important countries in the world today, okay? They have, roughly speaking, about 40% of the world's economic output, but they're growing much faster than the rest. They have 50% of the world's poor people. They have 60% of global GHG emissions, and they have more than 75% or about 75% of the world's population, right? So some of them are growing faster, and these are the bigger ones. These are India and China and Indonesia. The median middle-income country is not doing particularly well, just so you all know, right? Now, the big problem that we find with these countries is that they seem to have considerable difficulty in getting to high income. So getting from about $100 to $1,000 seems to be a lot easier than getting from $1,000 to $10,000, even though in each case it involves a tenfold increase in per capita incomes. So many of these countries seem to get stuck in the middle. Yeah. So back in 2007, about 15 years ago, Homi Kharas and I called it the middle income trap. We actually wrote a very nice report. It looked like this one here. Hold on. There, right? And we had lots of good stuff in it. And nobody remembers anything about that book except that it was the book that coined the term middle income trap. Okay. And we conjectured why this was happening, just so you know. And those were the conjectures over there. Right. But the thing was that the term has stuck. And if you sort of Google it, you'll find tens of thousands of references to it. We hear the term a lot when we talk to policymakers and policy experts around the world, right? Especially Asia, but not just. Okay? But even 15 years later, we're not really any clearer about what a country could do to avoid getting into the trap, right? Like Argentina and Russia have, for example, or South Africa and Nigeria have, or Brazil and Mexico, or Iran and Egypt, right? Or what people actually fear might be happening right now in a place like China or Turkey or even in India, right? Okay. Now, there's actually also no reason to believe that the next 2 decades, which are crucial for development in big economies like Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, and Nigeria, will actually be better for global development than the last 2 decades, right? So in fact, there are several good reasons to actually fear the opposite. I'll talk about this today. But in general, it appears today that middle-income economies seem to be growing into shrinking spaces. They're trying to sort of get bigger, but the space is shrinking, right? And this might be okay for a small economy like Singapore or Hong Kong and so on, but it's not okay it's not that easy for a big economy like China or a big economy like India and so on. But it's not only because of reasons abroad. At home, there is political polarization, right? Abroad, it is because of trade fragmentation. And globally, it's because of these pressures to accelerate the energy transition. So I'm going to show you a whole lot of slides today, and I'll try to sort of just go quickly through that. But at the end of it, they'll just have these three very simple points, right? The first is that even relatively successful countries that reach around $1,500, $2,000, or $2,300 per capita like India tend to run into difficulties in keeping growth rates as high as they did when they were low-income economies. And these difficulties are growing, okay? We have to recognize this problem. And in the report, we actually devote a whole section to it by documenting the stylized facts about growth in low, middle, and high-income countries. We try to sort of look to see whether or not growth in middle-income economies is different, is it slower, and is it getting harder, okay? So there's a whole section on that one. So at the end of it, you might not agree that there is a middle-income trap for sure and so on, but you'll have all the information to make up your mind, okay? The second is that researchers have been working on this problem, actually, or very similar problems for the last couple of decades. And they've been using promising ideas that go back to the work of Joseph Schumpeter, those ideas that were actually very nicely summarized by Professor Nair, who basically proposed that economic progress comes with these gales of creative destruction, who also mentioned all of the other things that Professor Nair said, in the sense that he talked about the inherent problems of capitalism, right? Okay. But what we do is that we realize that we have to utilize these insights, because some of those same concerns have always been around about capitalist systems and so on. While they do deliver progress, they also have these other problems. But what we did was we decided to utilize these insights. But this is not easy, by the way. It's not easy to utilize the insights of this, because they require recognizing that basing policy on bad data is generally worse than basing it purely on good theory. Bad data are the enemy of sophisticated analysis. Okay? And there's a reason why I'm emphasizing that while I'm here in India. Okay. Now, okay. So what we do is that we build on subsequent work on creative destruction by recognizing that, you know, we speak about creation, of course, and we speak about destruction, but there is this third force, and it's the most powerful force of all, is the force of preservation. Right? And that's the pressure to preserve the status quo. Right? And to discipline this work, we try to use a framework for balancing these fundamental forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. And India should not actually fall into the middle income trap if we are right that this framework is useful, because India has practiced with a framework of creation, preservation, and destruction for more than 5,000 years. Right? Okay. And then the third one, of course, is that because it involves economic, social, and political factors, policy making is tough under these circumstances. So just as Professor Nair said, keep in mind that Schumpeter's most well-known work was Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. So that it basically involves recognizing the inherent flaws of societies, which is imperfect competition, immobile societies, and illiberal politics. Okay? And our work suggests that we have to factor in these imperfections because they're perhaps most important during middle income. A lot of change needed. This is when structural change is needed most. Okay, so low-income economies, very roughly speaking, can develop with investment, and high-income countries can do so with innovation. Right? Middle-income countries have to figure out the complicated shifts from one to the other. Okay? They have to rethink, we think that they have to rethink long-held prejudices about large enterprises, about powerful elites and energy transition. And the biggest of them, like China and India, have the most difficult of all tasked because of divisions at home, because of pressures from advanced economies and concerns about the livability of the planet. I was mentioned that. And to grow to high income in a few decades rather than some centuries, they will have to create miracles, okay? And when we say this, we get attacked a lot saying, oh, you're making it too hard, et cetera, but you have to recognize what the problem is here. The problem is that given the odds of doing this, they're very long odds, and the odds became longer over the last few years, okay? All right, so that's what that's what I'm going to be talking about. And because I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to skip over some of the slides which are very, very difficult. And some of those actually Shomik will be able to explain. Some you'll have to wait for the report, but we promise that we'll make it a very, very readable report. Okay, so here's the outline of how I'm organizing the main ideas. The first one is the pathology. I'm trying to sort of use all of these terms that a doctor uses because I'm trying to pretend to be a doctor. But my daughter, who wants to be a real doctor, she actually says that I shouldn't pretend because I'm just a PhD, right? But I think it's a good analogy. So you think about what is happening to the body politic, to the body economic of an economy, right? Of an economy like India and so on, and say, what's the pathology here and so on. So the first one is that in general, I think there is enough evidence in favor of something like a middle income trap, okay, in general. In terms of the diagnosis, we think that the most appropriate framework for a time of constant structural change is that of creative destruction. Okay? And in terms of prescription, basically it says that doing well will involve making these miracles, and there is much bitter medicine to be had. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to go quickly through many slides, and Shomik and I will explain, right? And we'll share these slides with you. So I warned you. So now let me see if I can actually go quickly through the slides. So let me start with this one. This is the chart that I was mentioned. So if you have any doubts that we have a problem, when you look at this slide, you find that middle-income countries seem to be catching up slowly to the most important high-income economy, which is the US, right? But then you notice two problems with this graph, right? So one is they're still only 1/10. No, they are just 1/6 of the way, right? And if you exclude China, they're actually falling further behind. Okay? So everybody says, is it only China? Is it only China? In this graph, it's only China. Okay? Right. Okay. Then the other thing is you hit this chart. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but basically what this chart says is that relatively few countries have grown to high income since 1990, right? The exceptions are the countries of Central Europe, like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and so on. A few oil-rich economies like the UAE, a few resource-rich economies like Chile, right? And Venezuela, right? And then you've got the countries of East Asia that were really ferocious, right? In the sense that they actually saved a lot. They gave up human rights for a long time. They did all of these sort of sacrifices in order to grow faster, right? And there are about 31 middle-income countries that transitioned to high income. So out of all of these countries, the countries that are most relevant for a place like India are the East Asian countries. And if you really look at their history and so on, you actually find that they have had to sort of make a lot of sacrifices, okay? Now, the other thing that you see, is here. So when you start to look at growth rates of countries that have done well, right? So these, by the way, on the x-axis is the per capita income of the country in log terms, right? And then on the y-axis, you have real GDP per capita growth, okay? So these are countries that have generally done well. And if you sort of look at these countries, you have China, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Korea, and so on. If you look at India, India is the green line there, right? India is the green line at the bottom, okay? And what you sort of see right there, right? That's India. And one of the things that you see is that countries like that, even otherwise successful economies like Indonesia and India, have not been doing what it takes to emulate China. Okay? Forget about the other countries like Singapore and South Korea and Japan, which have actually managed to sort of keep this high growth, what I call hang time, for a long time. Okay? And they've only sort of gotten to the levels of growth and so on that India is going through way after they've reached $20,000, $30,000 per capita. Okay. All right. So if you see that India's growth rates today are more like what the most successful developers achieved when they had per capita incomes that were twice or many more times that of India today. If you compare them with the high achieving countries of East Asia, India looks downright mediocre. Okay? Now, if you add to this the three things, so here's another chart. If you want to get depressed even more, this is the number of years during sustained growth periods for countries that had more than 5% per capita growth. India is the green line at the bottom there below, right? The one just above India is Bangladesh, by the way, and that big red line there is Korea. That blue line that you see is China. Yeah. Okay. Right. All right. Okay. So now you have to add to this three problems that India has to reckon with. The first is market space. So the trade environment has become a lot less benign, and India is not exactly blameless too. The second is fiscal space, which is actually a lot more constrained because governments have borrowed too much. India has not been an exception to that problem. India's debt to GDP ratio now is more than 83%. Interest payments as a ratio of revenues, which have actually increased because of the GST implementation and so on, actually already more than 25% of revenues. Okay. And the country continues to run what I think are double-digit fiscal deficits if state deficits are included. Okay. The third is policy space. And in democracies, the options tend to be much more restrictive, and populist policies are very hard to resist, okay, especially in an election year and so on. Now, so I was asked, so what's the way out? What's the way out? Okay. So I'll give you the punchline that I sort of think it is. The way out is to rely on private investment, to rely on the ingenious people. Indians are ingenious people, okay? And new business opportunities like the energy transition, okay? Now, but for that, India will have to provide a lot more economic freedom to investors, workers, and businesses than it has. And this is easier said than done, because incumbent firms, entrenched workers, and state-owned utilities do not generally want economic freedom. Okay? They generally have it, and they don't want it for others. And they can often get governments to do what they want. Okay. So I want to show you two charts that highlight the nature of slowdowns. Okay? So this is what this essentially shows that the median slowdown or the mean slowdown occurs at incomes per capita of about 20% of US income. If you look at the median slowdown, it occurs when they are at around 10% of 10% of US income. If you look at India right now, India is at 5% of US income. Okay? So India should not be, should not be experiencing a growth slowdown at all. Even if one believes in the middle income trap, even if all of the stuff, India shouldn't be doing that. Okay. The other thing that you sort of see is this one here, is that if you look at the red line, these are countries that are experiencing, these are experiencing growth slowdowns at a much earlier stage than the countries that actually have better institutions or more economic freedoms. That's the blue line there. Okay? So if you had to sort of tell me, if you say what's the sort of two-line or two-word answer to the middle income trap? It would be economic freedom. But like I said, it's easier said than done. Okay, it's easier said than done because it involves economic, social, and political factors. And so that's the reason, Professor Nair, that's the reason why we thought that the right growth model was one that included all of these things, that it was Schumpeter. That was the reason. The other reason, of course, was there were some other people who thought the same thing. These are people like Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt, who had actually worked on these things and tried to sort of make the Schumpeterian growth models relevant, essentially, for growth in high-income economies. Then there were people like IHD Gill and others who actually worked even more on that one and actually developed those and refined these models and actually found a way to apply them to like middle-income countries as well, right? And so we drafted Ufuk to actually work with us, and he's been working. I think he's the only reason why we don't have his name on the slides is because we haven't been able to talk with him because he recently got married and he has his priorities right. Okay. But here's what I meant by shrinking trade and fiscal space, which will make it tougher for middle-income economies. It's not just India that has higher debt to GDP ratios that is being squeezed in terms of debt financing and so on. It's across the board. Okay? You see this again and again. We've essentially normalized a time when you sort of see that you have debt ratios that are about 80-90% in places like Egypt, and they thought they were fine. They were fine when you had really low interest rates, but they're not fine now because they can't actually roll over that debt. Some other countries said, no, we're not going to borrow abroad, we're going to borrow at home. But that's not costless either, because when the government borrows at home, there are others who can't borrow, right? Especially private enterprises and so on. So there's no free lunch when it comes to spending a lot on the government's time, right? Okay. I'm going to skip this slide and get to this thing here, right? So how does one? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but this slide actually starts to sort of look a lot more at what needs to happen when you have a poor country that essentially wants to grow, right? And you sort of see over here is that, of course, it starts out with investment, but what it must then do is actually go aggressively both on investment and imitation, and not try to jump too quickly to investment, imitation, and the innovation parts and so on. If it only focuses on investment, right? We have charts that show that actually, if only investment mattered, then you would actually find that countries that today have about 5-10% of US GDP would actually have something like 60-70% of US GDP. Yeah? So the main difference, the reason why they don't have it is because at some point you can't, you can get from $100 per capita to $1,000 per capita, then you start running into this thing that you can't just sort of continue to catch up just on the basis of investment, though investment never becomes unimportant. It never becomes unimportant. That's the reason why, if you look at the last part over there, you see investment, imitation, and innovation. And one of the things that you're sort of seeing right now is that there's a general weakness in private investment across the world. Right? And we've actually written a whole book on that. Okay. And if you look at the successful cases, you actually do find that countries like South Korea did a very conscious job of shifting from subsidies for adoption to subsidies for innovation, right? So it took these guys a long time to sort of construct charts like this, but they're very, very telling that you actually sort of see that the subsidy rates, for adoption were high, and then over time they declined. And at the same time, you see that innovation subsidies were increasing, right? South Korea did many things right. It did some things wrong too. But one of the things that you also see is that when South Korea had crises, it actually ended up using, by luck and through good policy, actually, it ended up using those crises very, very well. And crises are a very integral part of creative destruction, right? Because crises are when you get destruction, right? Now, long crises are bad because you don't get creation until an economy rebounds and starts to sort of grow again. So you do want that destruction phase, but you don't want it to be very long, right? And I think that countries like South Korea and all actually did that well. It also sort of tells you that countries like China and countries like India will have crises. And then you see that if you're a middle-income country, you have a double responsibility. It's not just to try to keep the crisis short, but it's also to keep the crisis one during which you actually do a lot of structural change. You get rid of old institutions and so on, right? Okay. There is a really good story about South Korea, which was that you actually found that South Korea had these very large firms, the chaebol. They actually had a lot of power, and they had set up their own banks, and these banks were borrowing abroad, short in dollars, and they were lending at home, long in won, but mainly to their own companies. Okay. And what happened was, because of the Asian financial crisis, they suddenly ran into trouble. Now, it turned out that at that time, they ended up reforming a large chunk of their financial sector, okay? And it was because one was that you actually had the policymakers were trying to sort of do this, and they used the crisis well. That was 97, 98. By 2001, South Korea was doing well again. So it ended up going into the next phase with much better financial institutions than it went into the crisis with. So, I think that one of the things that Anant will have to sort of worry about is to sort of make sure that whenever there is any such thing, that you end up not just trying to sort of keep the crisis short, but to keep it productive. Right? But the other thing Anant also has to do is that he has to go back and talk to the finance minister and to the prime minister and to perhaps the commerce minister and perhaps even the external affairs minister, that economic freedoms is an important part of making sure that we don't hit a middle income trap. Yeah? All right. Okay. So how do we do this diagnosis? So I'm not going to sort of go too much into these slides, but essentially, this is what the forces of creation, preservation, and destruction look like. Okay, so you have creation is not a weak force. Okay, destruction is a weak force, but they get dwarfed by the forces of preservation. And the aim of policy is to sort of weaken the forces of preservation, to keep the forces of creation strong, and sometimes to use the forces of destruction well, right? And at the end, it should look like this, basically, right? These forces should be in balance, right? In the sense that you have creation, preservation, and destruction. So in a sense, the challenge of the World Bank, of the World Bank's report, is to sort of show how countries that have been successful, the few countries that have been successful, have managed to sort of do this well, and countries that haven't have not. The other thing that you sort of see is that the theories of Schumpeterian creative destruction, they have these three features. They have these three features that are really important, right? So the first one is that you recognize that you don't have a single type of agent. You have heterogeneous agents, right? You have a differentiation among firms. You have small and large firms. You have new and old firms, right? And they're not the same, okay? The second one is that you have many types of workers. You have unskilled workers and skilled workers, you have rural workers and urban workers, and they're not the same. And actually, we find that those ideas have been quite well developed in the academic literature. Where the ideas were not very well developed was to actually distinguish between energy sources, because we felt that was a very important part of the debates and so on. Here is that there are different types of energy sources. There are some that are clean, there are others that are carbon intensive, there are some that are reliable and others that are risky. Okay? So you need to sort of do all of that stuff. So what we do in this report is that we actually differentiate between these things. And if you look at some of the slides, you'll actually sort of see that there are very clear differences in the distribution, in the size distribution of firms, in the kind of energy sources that people use, in the shares of the middle class and so on. Very clear distinctions between low, middle class and high, low middle income and high income countries. Clear distinctions, okay? The second thing that's really good about these theories is that they tend to be deliberately dynamic, okay? So you have to recognize, the weak part of economics is that we don't really have a good theory of entrepreneurship, right? And in a sense, what Schumpeterian creative destruction does is it actually injects a theory of entrepreneurship. So you recognize the importance both of creation, which is startups, investment, innovation, and destruction. So firm closures, skill obsolescence, and stranded assets. Like, you might have a stranded asset like coal or whatever, right? So this happens in the process of structural change and economic development, right? And then the third one is that, of course, you have the third aspect of it, which is actually part of the conceptual framework, is institutional inertia. Okay, so you actually have insights into the forces of the preservation of societal arrangements or status quo biases in industrial organization and public policy, and the catalyzing role of economic crises. Okay, so all of these things, it's complicated. It requires a lot more data, but the insights that it gives you are fantastic. Okay? So for example, I'll just take one quick example for you, which is that we've always sort of thought, how do you make sure that you have contestability in an industry? So one of the things that we do is that we say, let's look at the size distribution of firms, and let's see whether or not what share of the market is cornered by one firm or two firms or the top three firms, right? And if we've used to this idea of saying, looking at these sort of indices of concentration, if the industry is very concentrated, we say, the industry is non-competitive. Well, not so clear, because if at the same time you actually are open to foreign investment, that those large firms are actually competing globally. So they may not be really big globally at all. Okay? So then we say, okay, let's also try to sort of see whether or not new entrants are being prevented from going in or not. And victory, we say, actually new entrants are being prevented from going in. But then we find that actually new entrants are not, and some firms are exiting as well. And you say, that's good, that's good. But you then find that in some countries, the exiting firms actually have higher productivity than the entering firms, okay? Because the exiting firms are those that are actually productive, but they don't have good contacts with the politicians. While the entering firms are not that productive, but they have contacts with the politicians. Now, just imagine if you didn't do this, you would come up with the wrong conclusion, okay? So this is what I mean by you have to invest in better data. If you don't do that, you'll get the policies wrong, okay? It would be much better for you to just rely on really good theory, okay? It would be much better for you to not have this argument, say, that's very textbookish. You say, yeah, that's better than relying on crappy information or information, right? Poor information. Yes, sir.
Your picture is hiding the legend. You're not trying to quite clear with the red and blue bar.
US manufacturing, blue services.
Yeah.
Blue is service.
It's because we change a lot of these slides in the morning in the hotel.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. But we clean up all of this stuff and send you all of the slides. Okay?
And these look at the whole firm size distribution, including small ones to the largest.
They've got like hundreds of examples in the report, and you'll see what happens when you actually have really good data, you know? And you can distinguish between industrial concentration in Italy versus industrial concentration in India and so on. They've actually gone all out. They've done a lot. I'm not going to do it justice because we don't have the time. I just want you to really want to read the report. Okay. 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 All right. So then we say, all right, so what, because I've taken half an hour, I'm going to just stop at this slide and say, okay, now the third part of it is the prescription. The prescription, of course, is, you know that you're always going to have to deal with imperfect competition. You know that, right? You can't, so there's no point sort of trying to design competition policy with this abstract aim of, perfect competition and so on. You have to recognize that you have, but the main idea here is you want to make sure that you keep economic freedom as your sort of North Star, right? The second one that we talk about is that you actually, there are these things that we call merit activities. These are things that have positive external benefits. Okay? So for example, if I had to sort of say to you, what is the one activity that has a lot of positive thing, it is economic freedom for women. Okay, so if you have policies that actually encourage, social opportunity or equal opportunities for women, and by the way, these guys have a whole lot of these examples about women and so on, about neighborhood effects and so on, all of these things, right? Okay, but I'm not going to go into all of these things. Basically, I'll end with this slide here, which is the third thing then is, there has to be this thing about disciplining incumbents, sort of the cozy relationships between large firms and governments, cozy relationship between the elites and governments, cozy relationship between public utilities and the government, okay? All of these things will stymie progress, right? But by the same token, one of the sort of say is, given the fact that when you look at the economic history of successful countries like Chile, like India, and so on, it's not the case that it's only the new firms that bring innovation, or it's incumbents also actually do a lot of that. So it cannot be that you'd say, okay, small, medium firms, that's what we want, because these big guys are just trying to stymie progress. Because you have two types of big guys. You have big guys that look like that on the left, and then you have big guys who look like the one in blue. Okay? And you want big incumbents, especially in a more integrated way and so on. You want them, but you want them doing what the blue guy is doing, not what the brown guy is doing, right? Okay, and so on, right? All of these things. But I've gone on too long. So I know, Shomik, I know I have not done your report justice, but I have tried. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Indermit. It is such a vast topic, and it is not that easy to try and do justice to that within half an hour. And I think Indermit did a very good job of trying to do justice to that in that half an hour. As one would expect, there will be a lot of questions. Of course, I will just start off with one observation. Indermit repeated the point that making decisions based on good theory is always better than making decisions based on bad data. I think that is hard to contest. But I think, what about making decisions with no data? I think we have more of that problem rather than bad data problem. So we have to have data on many areas, such as.
But it's a fixable problem for a successful middle income country.
I agree. And I mean, no, to become a successful middle income country, we have to fix that problem first. So I agree with you on that one. I think what I liked about the presentation is that it kind of doesn't hesitate to go against conventional wisdom in some areas. And I'm sure the report will probably give us more insights. Like in the very first set of slides on page 2, you talk about to grow to high income, middle income countries have to reduce deficits in mid-sized firms, middle class families. And mid-carbon fuels. We'll come back to that. But this will also require shedding prejudices against large enterprises, powerful elites, and fossil fuel energy. So I hope your employer is listening to the last
Are you speaking of my
recommendation. Your employer.
My employer, yeah, unfortunately, too much. So you may not get it in the final version. So. Okay.
So there is some sort of a different kind of a middle income trap here. That's, I think, so economic freedom or intellectual freedom. So I think that is something to think about. Anyway, but that was, I think, was a very bold set of points made there. Before I invite the audience to ask questions, just a couple of small questions. What exactly is adoption subsidy and what exactly is innovation subsidy?
Shobhit, can you go to that mic and start answering the question?
And then second question is, it is, okay, to grow to high income, you have to reduce deficits in mid-sized firms, middle-class families, and mid-carbon fuels, yes. But to reduce deficits in mid-sized firms, middle-class families, and mid-carbon fuels, what else you have to do? So I want you to go down to the third level or the fourth level of granularity, if possible. These are my two questions. And how will you compare your work with that of, let's say, for example, Joe Studwell's How Asia Works, where he contrasted the successful transition of Northeast Asia versus the stagnation of Southeast Asia? These are my questions, and then we can invite the audience to have questions as well. Thank you.
So I'll start with a general answer, which is, I don't know if this works. It's not working, right? It's not working. It's working? Okay. So I'll start with a general answer, which is that you know, a part of the problem, Anand, is that when we are talking about, you know, making sure that medium-sized enterprises grow, we always or we invariably think that this is going to be at the expense of big companies. Yeah. And I think that this case after case, you see, that's not the way it works. Big companies and to actually get big companies to actually get small firms to become medium-sized firms, the role of big companies is hugely important. Okay, one. The role of exit is also very important, right? Naturally, because they free up scarce factors of production and things like that. That's very important as well, right? So that would be a thing. The second part is in terms of the middle class and so on. We always sort of say that, you know, it's the middle class that sort of put pressures, the right kind of pressures on better governance. You know, that they put pressure on the state, right? But we actually find again and again, if you have that, you actually get that pressure from the elites as well. Actually, probably much more pressure from the elites. The thing, though, is that you have to make sure that who the elite are, that the ranks of the elite are contestable. So, for example, you can have you can have a North American elite or a Latin American elite. Completely different results. Completely different results, right? And then the third part is that, you know, when it comes to the energy transition, right? One of the things that we sort of see, that the main thing that distinguishes rich countries from middle-income countries is that rich countries tend to rely much more on mid-carbon fuels, gas, stuff like this, right? So then the question is, in some sense, you can start to think of them as incumbents in the gas thing, right? So if you just take a look, for example, at what happened to gas exports and so on from Qatar and even from the US and so on, it went from Asia, all of it went to Europe, right? Because they could outcompete all of these. So then, but that's an important thing, because you then have to sort of see whether or not the energy transition involves middle-income economies going from coal to clean, or does it involve middle-income economies going from high carbon to mid-carbon, and richer countries going from mid-carbon to clean, right? Now, one of the nice things about the Schumpeterian framework is that it does look at things like institutional inertia and so on. It does look at lock-in effects. So you can actually analyze the lock-in effects and you say, you're going to have to make two transitions if you go from high carbon to mid carbon to no carbon. But in the other case, you might need to go, right? But you can incorporate those things, right? So you can start to sort of see whether or not that's right. Over to you, Ashram.
The question of innovation versus
Adoption.
So the story is about Korea. Korea's kind of going from being a low-income country to a middle-income country. And at that time, the Korean government says the only way we can think about getting knowledge from the global country is to allow our firms to license technology from elsewhere. So they picked these conglomerates. Samsung at that time is a noodle maker. They kind of help it grow into an early stage electronics company. And they say that we will provide you financing for the first time and help you secure finance, not on physical assets, but on the license you get from a Japanese company. So Samsung gets a license from NEC, starts making television. And then over time, because they make televisions, they need more skilled workers, they need better managers, they need more specialized capital. And they start doing televisions better than NEC can. At that time, NEC says, well, now we should increase the price of the license. And because the Koreans are getting equally as good as us in making televisions. And at that time, the Korean government thought, okay, if they're increasing the price of licenses, it's time for us to change strategy. So we don't only finance adoption, we can help you innovate and take you to the realm of risky ventures. So we know 8 out of 10 will fail, but it's a bet worth making. But it's only because all those capabilities were built in. They had skilled managers, they had skilled workers, they had specialized capital. They had grown to scale, and that allowed them to go into risky ventures for innovation.
Oh, that's pretty interesting and useful answers. Obviously, even for innovation subsidy to work, there are certain preconditions that need to exist before. I hope you have discussed it at length in the book. So when these subsidies can or will work, so what kind of preconditions are required? So it's not enough just to go from adoption to innovation subsidy, but you need a whole host of things to be already present to be able to take advantage of the innovation subsidies.
And a major point in the report is to say, how do you change gears as you go from imitation to innovation? But you can't leapfrog from investment straight to innovation.
Got it.
And this was a point, in fact, made in Indermit's book on the East Asian Renaissance, where they warn countries that there are too many graveyards of these failed innovation projects, right? When countries don't have institutional capabilities or human capital capabilities.
There's a good point to say that you have to go from investment to imitation before you go on to innovate. So I think now the floor is open to a few questions. We have 10 minutes. There are plenty of questions. Let's start with the lady in the front.
There's just one thing I wanted to add on it, which is that we are saying that, look, you shouldn't be prejudiced against big firms or against the elites, but in order for you to tell whether or not the big firms are helping or hurting, whether they're blue or brown, you need data. Okay. Yeah.
By the way, for Indian companies, there's great data in WorldScope. You can measure every large company, more than 250 employees, to great detail. So India actually has data even when ASI may not tell you that. So.
Right. So yeah, please. One small request. Please introduce yourself and keep your questions really brief. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll try to be brief. My name is Tanvi.
She's trying to be brief and you're not interrupting. Yeah.
So my name is Tanvi, Chief of Small Policy with UNICEF, and I'm South Korean, so I felt compelled to speak today after hearing a lot of stories about South Korea, and I witnessed the country from the time it was low income to middle income, and now where it's at. And I wanted to just go back to Dr. Kwame's point about people, because he talked about the 3 Ps. And you also focus a lot in your blog and all your writing on human capital development. Because I really am convinced that we need to actually also look at the quality of spending and investment and look at education and health, as well as social protection. You talked about energy transition.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because, as I said, we have only a few minutes.
So I just wanted
Just please keep your remarks or question brief, please.
So
Yeah.
education, health, and social protection, social security, what is your chapter going to look like in terms of covering how investing in those sectors will propel the economy to grow in an inclusive manner?
We'll take all the questions and then.
Okay, Dr. Mandal?
Yeah, I had a question about you had this nice diagram.
His voice carries up.
The voice carries.
No, maybe for the television, for the YouTube.
I'm
yeah.
Sudipto Mandal. My question is about the nice diagram you had of those three circles of, destruction, innovation, and preservation. And it seems to me there's a bit of a catch-22 there because the very people who should be leading the constriction of the preservation energies are exactly the people who are vested in preserving, namely the state, and that's your example. Now, there are obviously some escape routes through this. I wondered if you had some thoughts on what is the differentiator between nations that can't reduce the preservation instincts and those that can.
Yes.
The lady there.
Yeah. I'm Asha Kapoor Mehta. I chair the Gender Center at the Institute for Human Development. Firstly, very refreshing to hear you talk about bad data. The two things that come to mind immediately are female labor force participation rate, which in India is totally off reality. And the other is morbidity data, which desperately needs attention. What did you have in mind when you mentioned bad data?
We will take that gentleman behind Dr. Mandal, please. No, here. Sorry, okay, go ahead, please.
I'm Ajay Jakar. I work with a farmers organization. I just want you to correct my understanding if I've got it wrong, is that you're saying for India to break out of this middle income trap, some sort of inequality should be acceptable and some sort of human rights sacrifices or worker rights should be acceptable. Because those are the things you mentioned for one or two countries. And the other the other question is, what do you prescribe for India's farming sector? So that's two questions. That's one. And the last question is, do you foresee India going the German industry development way or the Korean development way? What do you think we are going at now? Yeah.
First, yeah. Come back.
My name is Santosh Mehrotra. Indermit, in your analytical framework, as well as your prescription, you rightly used, of course, the Schumpeterian framework, but at the same time, your entire analysis was very much supply-driven. On the supply side, what needs to be done. I thought what the problem, in a sense, currently we are facing in India is a demand-side problem on a massive scale, and you don't address that either in your analytical framework or in your policy prescriptions.
Explain that a bit. What do you mean by demand?
Well, you see, per capita consumption, private final consumption expenditure has not really been growing at a sustained pace. And a major reason for that is that just jobs are not growing. Job generation rates are extremely low. They have fallen dramatically. And there's plenty of data to tell us this. But on the data, can I just say, I don't want to take too much time, otherwise, on the data, I just want to say, there is actually plenty of data in respect of the middle size, when you're talking about the size distribution of firms, on middle and large. We have plenty of data now being generated by the CSO, called the Unorganized Enterprises Survey, which is done every year, 1920, 2021, 21-22. It's not been released.
Yeah.
Similarly, the economic census was done in 2019. It's not been released. So the problem of, you said we can fix that problem. Actually, the data is a lot of the data is actually there.
I think, yeah,
and it's not
so
getting released.
You made the point. Can we first take on these questions and then we can move on next set of questions here?
So my question is related.
So I do want to say one thing, by the way. I know that we are in India, so we are talking about India, but bad data is a pretty universal problem, just so you know. I mean, like, for example, I was reading that when the first defeats that the Russian army had in Ukraine, right? He didn't change his general, he changed the head of Rostat. Okay. So, so you do get this. But the main point I think over here is that if you're trying to solve this intractable problem of trying to sort of get to high income, not in 2 centuries, but in 4 decades or 3 decades, then you have to make policy based on reliable information. Okay, and you have to realize that, right? And I can answer the question about the sacrifices. I was not saying that India should sacrifice human rights and so on. India cannot, because we are a democracy the way we are, right? But what I'm saying is that does mean that the policy space is much more restricted as compared to the countries that could do that kind of a thing. When the policy space is restricted in one dimension, you have to find other ways to sort of try to continue to grow. So you have to find other things, which might be difficult to do and so on. So that's the part that we're saying is that you have to be much more aggressive about things like female education or female labor force participation and things like that. Now, there has to be an urgency about this. And my own sense of it is to speak like an Indian now. I think my sense is that I see an urgency at the central government level. I don't always see an urgency except for a few states. Yeah.
Do you answer questions?
Just a quick point. Shudipta, you talked about the 3 circles about creation, preservation, and destruction. And the typical Schumpeterian framework takes all change comes from entrance and all incumbents are blocking change. So it's very easy for you to put entrance in creators and incumbents in preservers. But then when you look at the data more carefully and the modern interpretation of that, it's both incumbents can be forces of change and they can be those who block progress using the dominance to have predatory behavior. And that's why we need the deeper diagnostics, the one we propose in the report to kind of distinguish among the two. So it's a little messy process, but it's an important process because otherwise it was too simplistic to say incumbents and elites are just, we are prejudiced against them. On the question about what does the chapter on social mobility and gender talk about, we kind of look very carefully at the forces of preservation that are social norms, the issues that are related to being in and out of the wrong networks, and looking at neighborhoods that restrict women getting access to education, but also translating that into labor force opportunities. And what's really interesting is that we have now microdata from a whole range of countries to show how women's labor force participation particularly dips as countries go from agrarian to semi-industrial, and they go from low incomes to lower middle income countries. And then even in terms of labor force participation, when India was Korea's income levels, Korea had 50% women's participation in the labor force, India has 20. So what is driving that? And what of those are some things that policy can influence? So we're going to talk a lot about social mobility and the role of women, both in the labor force, but also in education.
So I look at the growth rates, which I showed you in terms of the hang time and so on, and you sort of see where China is and you see where India is. You can start to sort of break down that difference. And one obvious place to look is you say female labor force participation in China is near 70%, 69, 71, something like that. And female labor force participation in India is less than half that, okay? So you say, okay, I want to catch up to China. And then you say, okay, you're going to catch up to China hopping on one leg, you're not going to be able to do it. Now, there could be other reasons too, but that's definitely one of them. Because if you look at there are so many other things about China that you sort of find are actually much less efficient as compared to India. Land markets, I mean, our land markets here may not be great, but land markets in China are, I think, I mean, factor markets in general in China are not particularly, I think, goods and services markets in China, I guess close to 95% of goods and services are intermediated through markets in China. Not true in the case of land, capital, and labor, right? So I think that they can also sort of free up a lot and get another run. And you actually saw that in the case of China, up to 2014 or so, you saw changes that were much more in that direction, right? It is only since then. The other thing I want to clarify is that you shouldn't say that India is in a middle income trap, because India, I mean, entered middle income not that long ago. I think that what we sort of see is that when you start to compare India with other countries that successfully moved on and so on, India looks like it might, unless it steps up its game very quickly, very rapidly, and a lot, India will likely take too long to get to high income.
I think before we take on further questions, there is one question from the online audience, which is interesting. How do you distinguish corporate freedom from economic freedom?
Shomik has to answer that question.
So I was recently in China, and the question there was, what sort of sectors are encouraged for the private sector to invest in? And they were all saying we should invest in EVs or looking at solar. And doesn't matter what sort of investment you have, you're unlikely to lose your shirt on that. So, and if you invest in some of the other sectors, things are going to be very challenging because the state has an outsized role. So that's kind of, I would say, almost corporate suppression. Economic freedoms are much more about the ability of individuals and firms and more general economic processes to start, to grow, to exit, etc. So there's a particular difference about the corporate suppression versus general economic freedoms.
Right. Okay, we can take a few more questions, gentlemen. Here, the friend.
So I see, for example, Anand, I see the Chinese government being very serious about trying to promote greater economic freedom for small and medium enterprises.
Is it I mean, you're talking in the current context or historically?
In the current context.
Okay.
In the current context. So actually, I mean, we speak with them a lot, and they're very, very serious about making sure that they push, and for good reasons, because they're worried about things like high unemployment rates of youth, and those are not things that you solve with corporate freedom, right? I think that on that side, they're probably, at least from our previous assessments, they're probably doing better than a lot of other countries.
On the MSME front.
Yes.
SME. Okay.
Yes.
That'll be good to know. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
But on the corporate side, I think if we had the data, it would probably tell the story that you have a very risky, that being close to the government has a huge amount of risk. Yeah.
I'm Sujit Bhattacharya, from CSI NISPA, formerly CSI NISTATS. What I found about yours, I would like to have a comment on that the transition of South Korea was also helped by a very strong absorptive capacity, which went through a very strong education system, which they had progressively done, which allowed them possibly from technology transfer to follow up innovation and go forward. So that is one comment which I would like to say, look at. What is your perspective on that? And second would be that when you said about the incubant farms, innovate, and they also innovate, which I feel is that when there is a very rich young farm startups and all, which are very innovative and they can connect to them in various different ways. So that was the point which I would like to.
We'll take two more last questions and then he will answer them together, one here and one gentleman here.
Sir, my question is regarding the good theory that you were talking about to guide. So there is a lot of good theory, anti-Schumpeterian good theory, which you are totally ignoring, post-Keynesian, neo-Keynesian, domestic demand-led growth, which is also much better for labor because we have more destruction than creation and there is too much of social dislocation, economic dislocation. So this heterodox post-Keynesian ideas are completely missing in your discussion of possibility.
Thank you.
Yes.
Gentleman here.
My question is, how do you see our subsidies PLI in comparison to the approach of South Korea?
One gentleman here, and then.
I
think there is no lack of interest in the topic, but the problem is there is a finite closing point. Yeah.
Hi, I am Shekhar Kumar and research scholar at University of Delhi. And my question is that trade open has certainly, we know that competitive advantage gains from trade and for the each and every economy. However, as what is its impact on the energy use in, especially in MIC group? Is it creating a pollution heaven such as in India, China, and etc., or we are able to imitate and innovate in the MIC group? But what is the impact of the 3P in this on this energy?
So can you please tell your question, and we will decide which ones he's in a position to answer them. Yeah.
No, it's good to hear the questions because even if we can't answer them, we will try to make sure that the report does.
Exactly.
Yeah, my name is Manish Agarwal. I am from the Institution of Engineers India. So actually, in your slides, you showed that countries, middle-income countries like Indonesia and Bangladesh, which are predominantly Islamic countries. So there, the female labor force participation is better than India, and they are doing better economically to India. Even if even when they have huge population like India, vis-a-vis the size, the areas of the country. So how do you explain the Islamic countries, predominantly Islamic countries like Indonesia and Bangladesh, doing better in female labor force participation as well as in other economic indicators as compared to India? They are doing better. So how can you, how do you explain that? Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. What's your question, gentlemen? Yeah.
My English would go, and one thing when I see this topic of creative destruction, one thing which strikes me in 2023 is AI and the rise of large language models, LLMs. So do you touch upon this topic in the report? And also a follow-up question is, has India missed the boat already, or we still have scope to catch up with this, the rise of AI?
Okay, one last question from there, and then you decide which ones to answer. Wait for the mic, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Uzair Khan. I am a PhD scholar in international organization at Jawaharlal Nehru University. In your presentation, you have mentioned about growth of Infosys and Tata has been more than industrial growth. So my question is, like you have mentioned about the political progress in context of imperfect competition, about the social opportunity and economic freedom. So when you're giving this kind of example in context of India, so how are those economies who are doing well in context of these parameters? So if you have mentioned it in your report, and how, like in today's environment, we kind of see some kind of unhealthy practices in like political aspects as well. So how these policies, how these political interferences in this economic freedom has impacted in other economies, other countries. So that would be a better lesson for us.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We can do it. That's it.
So on the digital part, which you spoke, at least, so I don't know if Shomik agrees with me on this one, but I believe that India is actually, given its per capita income level, and even otherwise, I guess, India is actually a leader in this. Because India has a very good digital foundation in Aadhaar and things like that. Then India has gone on to actually use that in a way to sort of cut the fixed costs of having financial accounts and so on. And then India has gone further than that and tried to sort of make sure that that digital footprint is actually that you can actually leverage that, you can actually capitalize that, you know? So I think India is actually a couple of steps ahead of others in that sense. So if that potential is realized, you'll actually sort of see that it can be both a growth promoting one and also very equalizing one. So I think India's on the cusp of a really, big revolution there, I think, right? And now, so I know that for it to happen, of course, you need regulation, right? You want to make sure, for example, that that digital footprint of a person belongs to the person who's creating that footprint. But it also then also, you should have enough economic freedom that you get a lot of innovation, you get a lot of new ideas and so on. But again, that's a really good example, by the way, because when you look at the big innovation, trying to get somebody a mobile phone at a very cheap rate to actually start to take advantage of that digital ID and so on. That was a large firm. That was not a small firm, see? So you do get this really nice synergy between a large firm actually then helping a lot of small firms get larger. So that was one thing. The person who asked about that, why are we only picking this particular theory? We're actually planting this theory on top of a lot of other things that we've done. If you think that neo-Keynesian or Marxian or something, those theories help you understand how some countries fall into the middle income trap and others don't, knock yourself out. You should use them, We thought that this was, that this actually provided some insights, that there were people who were actually working on it. The part that we didn't realize, I think, Shomik, am I right on this one? That part that we didn't realize is that so one is that if you sort of try to come up with policies based on incomplete or unreliable data and so on, you get things wrong, okay? You get things wrong, and that is definitely part of the reason for the trap. So that this informational thing that you have to feed into these models, that is a very important part of the, and you have to sort of realize that if you really want to sort of get out of this, you have to perform miracles, including get all these data and start to use them. Yeah.
Just a couple of quick responses. There was a question about trade and pollution effects. And so there's a big literature on whether trade creates pollution havens or pollution halos. And the evidence isn't, the jury's mixed on that. But the point is that trade's a really important way for middle-income countries to access technology and to build up capabilities. And now that you have so many trade barriers and regulations against trade openness, I think it's going to have a huge detrimental effect there. On the question whether on absorptive capacity and technology transfer, I think that's a very, very valid point. But the other point you had was saying who's doing all the, what sort of models do we have? And so if you looked at the early patents that were formed, that were in the US, that was all patented by individuals. But over time, like Edison sold most of his ideas to JP Morgan, and JP Morgan built a whole enterprise around it. And increasingly, patents started getting into the hands of corporates. And more ideas, because it requires a lot of upfront financing, legal costs for enforcement, trying to validate and scale up products, it all kind of moved from garage inventors to much more large corporations. And so you see both models at play, but increasingly in the US data, most of the patents are now registered by corporations, not by individuals. On the question that someone had on Infosys and TCS and the role of markets, what we are doing is doing a very careful decomposition of the economy into 4 types or 3 types of market structures. One are companies like Infosys and TCS who play in global markets. So if they don't perform well and innovate in global markets, they're going to lose market share and start kind of getting, and they'll be disciplined in that way. But then there are monopolies, national monopoly sectors, such as some infrastructure sectors and energy sectors, where state-owned enterprises are really dominating. And that's where regulations, both through, better pricing structures, competition for the market, those kinds of policies become important. And finally is this murky place where you should have competition, but contestability is limited. And there's a lot of favoritism towards certain firms in the domestic market. Then how do you use a whole series of regulations all the way, from the basic ones all the way to antitrust regulations to kind of discipline incumbents? So in one of the chapters looking at competition policy, we provide a full treatment of different types of market structures and what policymakers should prioritize differently in different markets.
So I just want to say one last thing, which is, so as I think about the large firms in India and so on, right? I think it would be a mistake to think that all of large firms in India behave like that brown guy there, and all of the large firms in some other country behave like the blue guy there. You've got large firms in India that are like the blue guy, and then you've got large firms in India that are like the brown guys. If I had to sort of say, generally speaking, I would say that, okay, I could be wrong here and I could get into trouble, but what the heck? I think that state-owned companies look a lot like that brown guy, and private companies look more like the blue guy.
Okay, I think, as I said, we need to bring this discussion and this presentation to a close. Both Indermit and Shomik have done a very good job of whetting our appetite for the real book that's going to come out soon. A couple of points. We all know that good theories are important, but theories in economics are only at best points of departure. There is no counterfactual possible in social sciences. Economics is one of them. And most of the theories on topics such as this are distilled empirical facts. And empirical facts cannot ignore the context. And we should also not make the mistake of confusing correlations with causations. So all these caveats should be noted and kept in mind as we analyze these conclusions and findings and what works and what doesn't work. The world was a different place in the 1980s when East Asia managed the transition, Northeast Asia from low income to middle income. Today, it's a different world. And we just need to remember, while there is a lot of skepticism in this room, some of it is justified, some of it is not. India did go from $288 billion in 1993 to $3.4 trillion in 2023, a 12-time increase. And despite the currency going from 30 to 83, 8.6% compounded growth rate in dollar terms. And if you look at the nominal GDP of India and China in dollar terms, of course, you would notice 3.4 versus 18. But you simply have to adjust for the amount of debt that both countries have accumulated. So per unit of debt, India's GDP is higher than per unit of GDP of China per unit of debt. So India has been a better utilizer of capital. So please keep these things in mind while you have your skepticism about whether India will get stuck in the middle income trap or not. We are not yet there. So with those words, I hope you have enough appetite left for the food also. Thank you very much.
I would request Dr. Tanaka to propose the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Priyanka, and thank you, everybody. You've all been very interested in the lecture. I'll just test your patience for 2 minutes more. Please bear with me. I just first want to thank Dr. Indermit Gill because, as you have heard, he is a friend and batchmate from Delhi School of Economics. It was wonderful to see you here, and I feel very proud of your achievements and hope you continue on your academic growth path. And of course, I hope that India can avoid the middle income trap. And just one point I wanted to, I would have liked to hear more examples, not just from Korea, but from other countries as well. So, and I'll also take this opportunity to thank Professor Lakhbinder Singh, who is a visiting professor at IHD, for facilitating the lecture by Dr. Gill. Our heartfelt thanks to Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, for agreeing to come and chair today's event. And the World Bank has co-hosted the lecture by Dr. Gill, and we are grateful to the country director who has joined this lecture and addressed this illustrious gathering. We do hope that the World Bank and IHD can continue to collaborate in the future. And we would also like to express our thanks to Dr. Soumya Kapoor Mehta for facilitating the collaboration with the World Bank. Next, I thank Professor Deepak Nair, Chairperson IHD, for his presence at this event and his insightful remarks, and we thank him for his invaluable guidance. Many of our board members are present here, Dr. Hashim, Dr. Sudipta Mandal, and I think our academic committee member, Dr. Pulin Nayak, who happens to be our ex-professor also at the school. They're all here, so thanks a lot, sirs, all of you, and for your continued guidance. I would also like to thank Dr. Sriranjan, Joint Director, for his support to the event. So lastly, I come to this, all the dedicated teams of IHD who have coordinated the communication and administration. Some people who have led this way in the departments, in these departments are Ms. Priyanka Tyagi, our CEO, Chief Executive Officer, who has been instrumental in various aspects, Ms. Jyoti Girish, the Administration and Executive Officer, Ms. Rekha Aswal, Administration and Program Coordinator, along with Aditi, Vikas, Siddharth, Arjun, Anisha, Bhavna, and Dhriti. Special mention for Amarjit for his help and the other admin staff. Thanks to Manish for his help in the technical department and Raja Films for AV documentation. Let us please give them a round of applause for their efforts. Yeah, and I'd also like to mention our faculty at the IHD because they've always pitched in for the events, for the Silver Jubilee celebrations, while continuing to work on the various projects that we do and help to make these a success. I express my heartfelt thanks to them. And of course, we express our thanks for all the help from the IIC team. Finally, I would like to express our deep gratitude to Professor Alakhan Sharma, the director of IHD, who played a pivotal role as the architect of this event. Like in the past, he has continued to guide and coordinate our efforts. We are truly thankful to you, sir, for your invaluable contribution and guidance. And thanks to you all for attending and participating, and of course, for your patience. I would like to hand over to Priyanka now for the final closure of this event. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of this event. Thank you all for joining, and please do join us for our future events as well. The reception is waiting. Thank you so much. The reception is hosted by World Bank. Good night, and thank you.
Can I take one? All panelists. Just 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. Please welcome.